Welcome back to the Changemaker podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is Tony McAleer. Tony is the author of the book, The Cure for Hate, co-founder of the Life After Hate nonprofit, and is president of the Cure for Hate consulting group. Tony was an affluent middle-class private school student and the son of a doctor, yet he ended up at the Aryan Nations compound in Idaho, falling in with and then recruiting for some of the most notorious neo-Nazi groups in Canada and the U.S. After 15 years in the white supremacist movement and becoming a movement leader, accomplished propagandist, and operator of one of the first white supremacist websites, he left the highest ranks of these groups and co-founded Life After Hate. What led him to disengage from the violent far-right cause, and how he works today to get others to de-radicalize, to exit from hate groups, heal, and become formers. Tony, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the Changemaker podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today, and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I found out about you and your story through our good friend, mutual friend, Dov Barron. But what an amazing story you have to tell. So tell us, how did you initially get started in the white supremacist movement?
It's sort of a bit of a long and circuitous journey, but I like you said in the in the introduction, I grew up as an affluent kid in a good neighborhood in Vancouver, and I had all the material wants and needs met. My father, who loved us very dearly in his own way, was a great provider. I didn't see him most of the time. He was working 80 hours a week, as many doctors of that generation were workaholics, and so the things that I craved and wanted most were the things that I couldn't get, and that was his time and attention. But I worshipped him, and he was like he was my idol. And when I was 10, I walked in on him with another woman, and that really rocked my world, and I felt betrayed by not just him, all the authority figures in my life. And I was angry, I was humiliated, and I felt shame and guilt, and maybe I was to blame for this kind of thing. And I started acting out at school, and I went from an A and a B student to a C and a D student. And by the next year at the all-boys Catholic school I went to, they tried many carrots, and in the end, they decided on the stick. And with my parents' consent and encouragement, if I didn't get an A or B on major tests and assignments, I was hit on the rear end with a yardstick. First time it was 2, then it was 4, then it was 6, never more than 8. And that happened over and over and over again. And I think even to this day, I don't think I ever felt more powerless than I did in that office. And that didn't make my grades better. In fact, my rebellion grew, and I went from listening to Elton John and Queen to The Clash and the Sex Pistols, and got into the punk scene, and was really rebelling against everyone and everything. And it was in the punk scene that I came across the skinheads and got introduced to that. And at first it wasn't political, but they were fearsome. They terrified me, because I grew up in this, I was a smart kid. I was never a tough kid. I'd been in maybe, 3 schoolyard fights and, lost them all. Yeah. But I was drawn to these guys, and my parents, later on said, or even at the time said, what are you doing hanging out with these guys? You got your whole life ahead of you. I'm 16 at this point. Your whole life ahead of you, and you're hanging out with these guys that are going nowhere. And, I reflected on it later, I got it. They had the one thing that I didn't have, and that was toughness. And when I was with them, people were afraid of me. They weren't afraid of me; they were afraid of them. But that fear and notoriety, and when I first got involved in street violence with these guys, it was to go from that place of complete powerless to that feeling of power and being the one dishing out violence instead of receiving it. It was intoxicating. And as the music became political, and I was sort of the intellectual of the group, big fish in a small pond, I sort of went, the more notoriety we got, the further we went. And the further we went, the more notoriety we got in. And I went to the extremes, and the fear, the notoriety, the false sense of power. Those are what really drew me in. And it's a misconception people have that the ideology is the primary driver, but it's not. It's these deeper psychological needs and gaps that we have, and the need to belong, the need to be accepted and have community and brotherhood and a sense of purpose. And, when I look at it, I got power when I felt powerless. I got attention when I felt invisible, and I got acceptance when I felt unlovable.
Would you say, Tony, this just strikes me that it seems to me like a lot of terrorist organizations in the Middle East, you've got young people that are in the same situation. They feel powerless. They feel like they've got no future. And so it would seem like people with that attitude, if you're giving them a place to belong and some sort of a sense of control and power when they have none, those would be easy recruits.
Absolutely. And I don't think it is any different, whether it's terrorists in the Middle East or gangs in the inner city.
Yeah.
Somewhere. It's the same dynamic. There might be, subtle differences, but the core mechanism is the same.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think of Dr. James Gilligan, who wrote the book. He was a forensic psychiatrist in one of, I think it was San Quentin, one of the California penitentiaries. He was there for 20 years. And he wrote a book called Violence, Reflections of a National Epidemic. And he said he never saw or was aware of an act of violence that wasn't rooted in shame and humiliation. And he said all violence is an attempt to transform shame into self-esteem.
Well, it seems to me that, the age we live in, it's so violence, hatred, all these things can be spread in an instant through social media, which generations ago was not the case. But it seems like whether it's hate groups or anything else, it's much easier for them to connect with a broad web than it was. I mean, you can have hate groups all over the world that are interconnected. So talk about your view on that. Did that sort of, when you came into it, did it morph into that situation? Because I would guess we're, about the same age. That was not necessarily the norm when you first got involved in the white supremacist movement.
No, it wasn't. When I first got involved, you had to order books or cassettes or videotapes, and it, maybe took a month or 6 weeks for it to arrive. There was no same day delivery with Amazon or anything like that. And so the process of radicalizing took months, if not years. It wasn't that easy to get a hold of the material. And I remember when the internet first came out, and the first white power record label in North America, I built their website, and it was a game changer. But when I think about the speed at which you could get information on the internet, and the reach and the anonymity, or the perceived anonymity at the time, was a real game changer. And when I think back to the early days of the internet in the mid-90s, you went to the internet to seek information, right? That was sort of the primary reason. But if you fast forward to in the middle of the last decade, and social media and the rise of social media, it changed, and the reason of using the internet was to find community, not information, and we got our information through the communities that we found, and so that, yes, it gets filtered by the algorithms, but it also gets filtered by the communities we choose to associate and spend time with, and that was really a game changer, because I think, for disaffected youth that might have been sitting in their mom's basement playing video games, now they could connect with 100,000 disaffected other youth that are sitting, in their basement playing, to use a gross generalization. So, I mean, no matter what you're into, you can find a community of it on the internet. And I think that community aspect is really, really elevated things to hyperspeed. And now, if you look at Dylan Roof, started with the search for black on white crime, before he murdered 9 people at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, went down that rabbit hole. And with the internet and the social media and the echo chambers, the time to radicalize is days and weeks. It's not months and years. And so the whole process has been compressed. And the limit is not the speed of US Post 30 years ago. The limit is your capacity to absorb information, the speed at which you can do that.
It's interesting, and I've shared with people that I had a neighbor when I was a child that used to continually talk about bombing the school. And I'm not sure, I think he's off the grid now, but I've shared with people, I think if that was today and he had access to the internet and all the information, I really have no doubt that he would have done it at that point, because he probably couldn't find that community for himself in the 70s, but now, as you say, it's all about community, and people they really want to fit in. And if they don't feel like they're fitting into mainstream society, they're going to find their tribe.
Yeah, and if they can't find community, they can at least find an audience.
Yeah. Which is, that's an even scarier part, because it seems like to me that we worship the cult of celebrity, and to these disaffected youths and others, to commit a heinous act, and you're part of the mainstream media now. Maybe in some ways that does, in an awful way, it makes you a celebrity, but as you say, it gives you the attention that you've craved, that you've never really received.
Yeah, and I think I harken back to a thought I had about with my father, and it being impossible to get his time and attention. And and I said to someone once, the only thing worse than his disapproval was I just trying to remember the word I was looking for, his indifference.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I was raised in a big family, and I've been so blessed. But my father, I'm the youngest of 5 children. My father was a corporate CEO, and so he didn't come to all my games and everything. But because he was out of town so much. But I'm like, my father flew B-17 bombers in World War II and was my true north. And his father died when he was 12. Well, I think serving in the military really instilled those values of duty, honor, integrity, service above self that he instilled in me. But I think I want to talk about this, because I say, just because somebody was socialized in a different way than you were doesn't make them bad or wrong. But I think I fully understand that, I was not socialized in a impoverished inner city neighborhood, but I don't, because somebody was impoverished, was socialized in that situation. If I had been in that same situation, I would have similar worldviews to them. But I think we're in this situation, and I want to talk about polarization, where it's like, if somebody's views are different, or there are a lot of people that feel this way, is somebody's views differ from my own, politically, socially, they're bad, they're wrong, they're the other.
I just want to start here real quickly too, is I don't blame anything on my childhood or what happened.
Yeah.
Everything I did, I chose to do, and I accept
Yep.
responsibility for that and accountability for that. But I share the things from my childhood through you, so you understand the lens through which I made those choices. And I
Yeah.
think understanding is the first step to healing,
Exactly.
and I think that applies in the inner city as much as it applies to me or the Middle East or anything like that.
Well, it's, I've always focused on curiosity though too, and I was thinking about this. I just have always been naturally inquisitive, and I don't want to just know what somebody thinks. I'd like to get the root of why they think that way. And here again, I think if we can keep an open mind, we can have a civil conversation. But it's just like if somebody expresses their views and you automatically dismiss them and say they're bad or they're wrong, rather than, okay, what brought you to the views you have? And I think that's going a little deeper than just having that conversation that's, nope, you're bad, you're wrong, I'm not going to be around you.
I agree with you on the curiosity there, because especially with the time that I've had at Life After Hate and the hundreds of people that we help leave these groups behind, everybody has a story. We can look at the picture on the face of it and be horrified and make ourselves feel better and morally superior. But everybody has a story, and the other thing to be curious about is what's my story.
Yeah.
It's just as important to understand ourselves and why we do what we do as it is to understand others. But I think when we keep that curiosity open and sort of get to understand each other's stories, real connection can be made.
And I wrote a book a number of years ago, The Changemaker, but it writing a book, and you've written a book obviously too, I think takes a lot of introspection. And one of the things that I realized through writing the book is that I've always been inclusive by nature, but I don't know that that's necessarily in my DNA. But we've spoken before. I was born in Montreal and moved to Augusta, Georgia, 4 years old, painfully shy kid with a thick Canadian accent. And you talk about, the Deep South in 1971. I knew what it was like to feel like an outsider. But due to that, I mean, I became one of the popular kids or whatever, but I always wanted to make other people feel like they were on the inside because I knew what it was like to feel like an outsider. And I took that into office, and I've taken that into everything I do. But had it not been for that experience in my life, as I say, I don't know that that would be such a primary focus in my life. So as you say, it's kind of know yourself.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of, particularly with our friend Dov Barron, who was instrumental in my journey inward as a counselor and coach, mentor, and friend. The more I got to know myself, the more I understood others. And the more I understood others, the more I was able to know and understand myself. It's sort of this positive feedback loop that, if we practice it enough on others and ourselves, it's quite illuminating.
Well, so we've talked about what you got you into the movement. Talk about how you got out and what led you to doing the amazing things, the healing work you're doing now, and getting other people out of the movement. Just what began the process and really stirred the process to get out of the movement?
Sure, and if I put it, in a nutshell, to summarize how I got into the movement, there's research that's recently been done, and I believe it's 15% of the American population has 2 or more adverse childhood events. If you look at people that get involved in extremist groups, 66% have 4 or more. So there's a strong link between trauma and joining these groups. And what is it that trauma does? And when the wounds and the scars heal, it's the emotional mark that gets left behind, and it leaves us with a sense of what's called toxic shame. It's an impaired sense of self. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm less than. I'm not worthy. I'm unlovable. And it sits in our psyche, at a subconscious level, and we live our lives in reaction to that. We'll become perfectionists to hide our feeling of flawed. There's a whole spectrum of antisocial outcomes that are part of that, and it's the self-alienation and dehumanization of the self. And so if toxic shame is at the root of the problem, what is the answer? And for me, the catalyst was the birth of my daughter and my son 15 months later. And up until that point, I had my head so far up my ego. I was a complete narcissist. I'd cut off the feeling, of the heart. As we go through things as a child, we put on armor, we numb ourselves, we put on masks to pretend we're somebody, we're different in order to feel safe. And in that locked off place is where it felt safe. But, my children started to unlock that. And the amazing thing about children is, their love is infectious, right? And
yeah.
And when they're 1 and 2 and 3 and they love us unconditionally, and it's safe to love a child because they're not capable of rejection. They're not capable of shaming. They're not capable of ridicule. That comes later in their teen years. But it began a thawing process, and I started to let myself feel again, and as I moved from my head back into my heart, I'm still guarded, but it was a safe space for me to do that. And, that began a process. And my children, who didn't understand the word compassion, couldn't speak it even, what they showed me was compassion and when we're compassionate with someone, we hold a mirror up and allow them to see their humanity reflected back at them when they couldn't see it on their own. And that's what my children did to me through the expressions on their face, through the look of their eyes. I could see something reflected back at me that I couldn't see on my own when I looked in the mirror. And that was the first gift. And so compassion is the antidote to shame. Shame alienates us, dehumanizes us. It's our internal dehumanization, and compassion rehumanizes us. And so I've learned many lessons about compassion along the way. And when the children were 2 and 4, me and the mother split up, and I ended up being a full-time single father and needed my mother's help to raise the children. And she taught me another important lesson about compassion, and that was her love for me was unconditional, but her relationship with me was very conditional. And if I needed her help, I had to extricate myself from the social scene I was in and all of that stuff. And the more I spent as a single father, the more I was moving away from that stuff. Anyways, it was not in the best interest of my children. But she taught me healthy boundaries and consequences, when combined with compassion, is a very powerful thing. And as a single father in the 90s, single dads then were like unicorns. And I got all kinds of attention, acceptance, and approval, all those things I sought, 15 years earlier, but in a healthy way. And single dad became an identity for me. And that's the hard part in leaving these groups behind. Is it wasn't just what I believed, it was who I was. It was my identity. It was what I watched, what I read, what I wore, who I hung out with. It was far more than just a belief. And it's one thing to get someone to admit what they believe is wrong. Try and get somebody to admit who they are is wrong. And that's a whole other kettle of fish. And that's why it's difficult. That's why you can't intellectually give someone, immigration data to change their mind on their white supremacist views, immigration in a positive light, because it's about so much more than just the ideas in their head. It's about identity. That's another aspect of it. But I was able to gravitate and shift to the identity of single father. And I got all of the things that I'd been seeking, but I was getting them now in a positive way, which was different. So the challenge in helping people out is how do you transition them to a healthier identity? And that's another layer of complexity when helping people leave.
Well, I mean, what you're doing to me is the definition of leadership. You're taking lessons learned the hard way and applying them to help others, to improve their lives, to get them out of the movement. During one discussion, you told me about you actually went to Auschwitz, and just talk about the experience of, as a former white supremacist leader, what was going through your mind and your heart as you were at Auschwitz?
Right. So after about 10 years after founding Life After Hate, the sort of next evolution of my journey went from, working with Dov to heal myself. Then I get to a point where as human beings, we can always help people who are one or two steps behind us, helping others get to the same place that I did, and then working to build an organization to build on that work. But once I had done that, the next thing that really called to me was I need to go back to the communities that I've harmed, and the Jewish communities, probably the community that I've harmed the most, because I wasn't just a white supremacist. At the core of the white supremacist ideology is a virulent anti-Semitism, and with that was Holocaust denial. So in 2018, I went to Auschwitz to, in a way, because the Holocaust denial piece was something that I just parked it in the closet. It didn't have any significance or importance to me anymore, but I'd never gone and looked at that. And so it was in a way confronting myself on that journey. And it was also a journey of atonement. And we documented it. The film will be in film festivals next year, The Cure for Hate. And it was challenging. I spent 15 hours over 2 days with a guide that was sort of handpicked, knowing my background. And it was a very, very profound experience. And I felt shame and disgust. And I felt anger at myself and how I could have, believed it. And in the Holocaust denial, there's a part where I felt, it's almost like hiding a crime after the fact.
Yeah.
It was almost like being an accessory after the fact. I had feelings of that going on, and it was a very deeply profound event. And being able to be in Krakow and Warsaw, and before I went to Auschwitz, I was at a wedding in Budapest, and we were staying, me and my fiance were staying in an Airbnb in the old part of the city. And as we're wandering around, we came across the memorial to the Budapest ghetto. 400,000 Jews were sent from Budapest to Auschwitz. And, looking on the map, the Airbnb we were staying in had been part of the Warsaw ghetto, and the bedroom we were sleeping in, people would have been overcrowded and sleeping in there during that time. And yet there was, at the memorial, there was signs of what was vibrant Jewish life, but it's just not, there's no Jews there anymore, hardly. Yeah. Same with Krakow. And, there's 7 synagogues, and they barely have enough Jews in the Kashmir district of Krakow to hold a service in the smallest one. And there was all these, you go by a community police station, and there's a little indentation in the door frame where the mezuzah scroll used to be that Jews would have on their door frame as they go in and out of the house. They touch it. It's a religious thing. But to experience these communities that had been emptied of Jews and still empty today, and go to where they had gone to, and the sheer scale of Birkenau is really mind blowing when you take it in. Auschwitz, the original camp at 25,000, Birkenau could hold 125. And just the size of the logistical operation that was emptying cities across Europe and delivering them to places like Auschwitz, it was a humbling experience. And I remember feeling nauseous, disgusted at just the reality and the scale of it all. It's anybody who says there wasn't a plan or it didn't happen should go there, or at least watch the film, because there's no question in my mind.
Well, I very much look forward to checking out the film, but I want to get your take on something that's a current issue today, and that's Kanye West's anti-Semitic statements. He's got a big voice, and there's been backlash. Obviously, his agency has dropped him, corporate sponsorships have dropped him. But just for you, what are the dangers of somebody with the profile and the celebrity of Kanye West making those statements?
Well, when you have someone as charismatic as Kanye, then you have people that will follow their every word, regardless of what's said, right? And we've seen that obviously before in this country, and the danger is, I think, that it gets believed and normalized. When a celebrity can say horrific or insensitive things, it helps to normalize it. And I think the danger, and having just recently in the last few years been to Auschwitz, is things can get normalized to the point where the unspeakable becomes normalized. Where does it stop? Right. And, if you looked at, we look at in the film, the precursors to Nazi Germany, and many of the same conditions exist today. And I'm not saying that that's where we're headed, but the raw materials, the kindling is there. And I think we have to be vigilant, and we have to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters who are at the brunt of this, or marginalized people of any race or orientation that are coming under these kind of attacks. And I think it's important that we don't disconnect from it and say, well, that's Kanye talking about Jews, and I'm not black and I'm not Jewish, so what does it have to do with me? I think we have to come together as a community, and be good allies and be good citizens, and come to the aid of those that are being oppressed.
Well, it's interesting. I just was doing some research for an op-ed recently, but you talk about that what had become normalized in Germany. We think, we're good in the U.S. Our democracy's okay, which a recent Quinnipiac University, I think that's what it is, the Q School poll found that 69% of Republicans and 69% of Democrats think that democracy is in peril of collapsing. And so there are different reasons for that, but I'm like, well, at least they can agree, a majority can agree on one thing. Now, what are you going to do about it? So you and I are both founding partners with Starts With Us, which is a national nonprofit focused on getting us beyond polarization by focusing on everybody treating each other with curiosity, compassion, and courage. And so that, to me, that organization and participation with people like yourself in it, that gives me hope. And I've always said that leadership is about providing hope. And I think as long as if you don't provide an alternative to the politics of the status quo and to giving, a megaphone to the vocal minority, celebrities and or otherwise, if nobody challenges the status quo, there are people that profit off of the status quo. I get that. But I'm proud that I believe that Starts With Us is really stepping up to the plate to challenge the status quo of polarization.
I
And
agree.
that's punk rock as hell.
And I'm hopeful. With all this discussion, it's not to be unhopeful. I've come back from a very dark place.
And that provides hope in and of itself. I mean, you're living, breathing proof that nobody is irredeemable.
Absolutely, and I totally believe nobody is irredeemable, and I think that the middle, the majority is in the middle, not in the outer edges.
Yep.
And I think they just need to awaken to the power they actually have. They're busy with their lives, and how we awaken is we work with curiosity, compassion, and courage, and incorporate those things into our lives. And we have to be the example we wish to see, right? That's at the key of it. It starts with us. And there's a friend of mine, Jamil, wrote a book on kindness, the war on kindness, and he's got some great stories in there of how kindness can change things. I think it's Orange County. I think it was the mayor of Orange County, or mayor in Orange County, started a campaign called A Million Acts of Kindness. And they tried to get people doing these sort of random acts of kindness and do different things to make connection with people. And what they found after a couple of months is bullying in schools had dropped by 30%.
Yeah.
And so there's, as human beings, we have the incredible power, whether we are aware of it or not, and whether it's for better or for worse, to inspire others. Right. And it's important for us to become conscious about that piece of our greatness, and to take control of it, and to inspire people with purpose, with intention, for good. And often that takes courage, and it may seem scary, but so much about fear is just in the mind anyways. And I think people need the solution to this problem doesn't exist inside our comfort zone. We're going to have to step outside our comfort zone in order to solve this. And it's very, very solvable. And we have to practice our courage, our compassion, and our curiosity.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it's not that difficult. Start with something small, just a random act of kindness to someone who you don't think deserves it. And see how it makes that person feel, and see how it makes you feel. And I remember this time I went to a gas station. I was in my car, and it was a gas station near my house, and I recognized the old, I think he was Lebanese guy who was, pumping the gas, and he brought me a coffee. I didn't ask for one. I was busy on the phone, and he just brought me a coffee that morning. And it was like, wow, like he didn't have to do that. He's working probably not much above minimum wage. And so I got out of my car, and I said, I put $20 in his pocket, and I said, he had his name tag, Jeff. I don't know if that was his name or not. And I said, Jeff, I see you. I see you. And you're a good man. And thank you very much. But I just want you to know that I see you. And then tears started to roll down his face. And then tears started rolling down my face. It was this weird moment where in the hustle and bustle, we stopped and connected with a stranger. And I still get my eyes talking about it now. And, for the rest of the day, I thought like that was the best experience I've ever bought for $20. Yeah. Like I felt good for the rest of the day. Like it, when you when you get into doing and practicing this stuff, it really changes how you feel and how you be. And, I can't imagine not doing that stuff anymore.
No, and we're, as human beings, we're hardwired for human connection. And I think having personal experiences like that, and it's hard to hate somebody whose eyes you're looking into, or to basically overgeneralize. Well, all Arabs are this way. All anybody is this way. It's just it's once you make that human connection, that's where it all starts. The healing in our nation and in this world, and it does. If everybody has an experience like that and goes out and tell their friends, I read a book. I'm sure you've read The Tipping Point. I believe we can tip it back to, turn the ship around. It's going to take time and effort of a lot of people, but I think your story helps show, here's a guy that society would have said is irredeemable, and he's overcome, the struggles in his life, and he's making this positive impact, and he's speaking in synagogues all over the place, and he's making this movie. So you, my friend, are an inspiration, and good leadership is about inspiration, and you are a leader on so many levels. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, as we wind down here, Tony, I want to get, for our listeners and viewers, we're on YouTube, where can people find you?
You can reach me at tony@thecureforhate.com. There's a film that's coming out called The Cure for Hate, a former white supremacist confronts the legacy of the Holocaust. There's also a film on Amazon Prime that I'm featured in with the same director and the same editor called Healing from Hate. If you search for that on Amazon Prime, you can watch it. And of course, the book on Amazon or wherever is The Cure for Hate, a former white supremacist journey from violent extremism to radical compassion. But email me at tony@thecureforhate.com and I'd love to hear from you.
Well, so I always at the end like to ask my guests this question. What on a daily basis brings a smile to your face and puts joy in your heart?
I'd like to say my walks in the woods, and that is where I go. The woods is my church. It's almost like my spiritual chiropractor, and I go there and I give gratitudes for the wonderful things happening in my life, and I put forth intentions and ask questions, and it's amazing what comes to me in the woods, and that self-care is the part that is really key to me keeping going. But just my grandkids, my watching my children grow into parents, and watching the grandchildren with, that I've got two that are 1 and one that's 3, and just the curiosity and the innocence, and remembering that state is still within us as well. And when I'm reminded and connected to little Tony who was 3 or 4, and I think your listeners can go back and think of who they were at 3 or 4, and that I was this curious, mischievous, stubborn, sensitive, open to the world little guy, and when I can connect with him and bring him forth into my life, because he never went away. People say I don't believe in change. People don't change. And I'm saying you're absolutely right. Who I was as a white supremacist wasn't me. It was the furthest I could have possibly have been from little Tony. And the journey back from that is the journey to reconnect and to connect with that core essence of who I came into the world to be. And I think when I have those little connections with little Tony, that brings a smile to my face.
Man, I still have that shy 4-year-old Canadian kid with the thick accent in me for sure. But Tony, it has been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to working with you going forward to really kickstart this movement. I believe in the work that we're doing. I believe in everything you're doing too. So thank you so much for being an awesome guest.
Thank you for having me.
So to everybody, don't forget to subscribe, rate. We need you to do that. But other than that, that's all the time we've got, and we are dropping the mic, and we are out.